I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
And serve is what she did. 11 Bandannas, Khumo here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel where people watch me speak about whatever crosses my mind, and I'm okay with that. In today's video, we're going to be discussing the internet's response to the sad news that we received lately about the passing of Her Majesty the Queen, as well as why the internet is so divided over this issue. And I do want to say that we're going to have different views about this entire situation. So if you do want to share your opinion, your thoughts, your perspective, do so respectfully down below. I am always eager to learn, so as long as you put your thoughts in a way that is meant to educate and not attack, it will be met with that same response. Also, I just want to say that I am a fan of learning about the British monarch. I myself used to be a monarchist when I was younger, but unfortunately that was due to the media I was consuming as a citizen of a country that was once under the British Empire's rule. And as I grow and learn more, I do realize that it's difficult as a person of color to be a complete fan of the British monarch, knowing all of the things that they have been responsible for. But to some extent, I will say that I'm very glad to be living in a time where we actually still have an active monarchy. Like, it's been so fascinating and insightful to witness all of the traditions, all of these archaic traditions playing out in real time. Like the proclamation of King Charles, excuse me, I have not changed the BBC channel once since the 8th of September. Just putting the fangirl side of me out there so that monarchists are kind of kind to me in the comments. On the 6th of September 2022, we got to see new photos of Queen Elizabeth II meeting the new Prime Minister, Miss Liz Truss. And this sparked a conversation about the Queen's health online. Many people were concerned about how frail she looked in those photos and were wondering if she can continue to carry on with her royal duties. Thursday, September 8th, we got news that Her Majesty the Queen is under intense medical supervision at Balmoral Castle, and that the royal family is rushing to be by her side. And immediately when I heard this news, something in me kind of told me that this was the last time we're going to see her. And what do you know? Later on that very same day, we got news that unfortunately Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has passed away. Very sad if you ask me. She was Britain's longest reigning monarch and the second longest reigning monarch in history. Now, like a normal Gen Zer, my initial response was to grab my device, go on Twitter, and see what people had to say. And boy, was I met with chaos. I was expecting to open this Twitter app and be met with tweets of people passing on their condolences, people expressing how surprised they were by her death, even though she was 96. Just people being sad and paying their respects, essentially. But that was 1% of what I saw, because I was met with GIFs, I was met with memes, I was met with TikToks, I was met with Twitter threads, I was met with jokes of this entire situation. It was a mess. Twitter was in shambles, and never had I seen such a divide. This whole thing is gonna go down as one of Twitter's most iconic moments. The main girly pops being black and brown Twitter, girl, give them their tens. They gave us content. I was literally that SpongeBob meme. You know that meme that goes, that's horrible, that's fucking hilarious? That was me the entire time. And to my surprise, Irish Twitter was in the mix. What? And this is why I appreciate when moments like these happen online, because there's always something to learn. Now let's discuss why the Twitter streets were in the Olivia Rodrigo brutal era and did not share the same sentiments as the rest of the world about this unfortunate event. Now, when it comes to basic etiquette, yes, it is insensitive to publicly gloat over any human being's death, and it is cruel to wish any form of suffering on anyone. However, it is very important to also acknowledge the fact that not everybody, based on how they spent their time on this earth, is going to be afforded the same respectful send-offs. The British Empire, how it attained its wealth and power, and how it continued to, and still does, maintain that wealth and power. Let's just say in gay terms, not very slay of them, not very girly pop, okay? And Nitish Pahwa actually explained this very well. Now imagine that you, like me, have familial origins in any one of the hundreds of countries that were subjected to the cruelty of British rule. So most likely you did not grow up with the view of Buckingham Palace in the skyline. However, you still felt the presence of the British crown in other more insidious ways. For example, the enduring injustices of the slave trade, views of poverty and underdevelopment resulting from centuries-spanning exploitation, displays of plundered objects from your very own country used as trinkets across European museums, the very presence of an iconic Indian jewel on the crown Queen Elizabeth donned, the very same crown that now Queen Consort Camilla will wear, the whitewashed legacies of empire officials who were actually violent, vicious bigots, none of which were corrected with apologies, trillion-dollar compensation, or even basic acknowledgement from the crown. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was the figurehead of the state responsible for this for 70 years. Until her last days, she has never publicly admitted, let alone apologized, for the oppression, torture, dehumanization, dispossession visited upon people in the British colonies before and after she had ascended to the throne. And I do see and agree that to some extent it is a bit unfair to expect one woman to make up for all of the injustices that were started by her forefathers many years ago. But it is a fact that she did way less than she could have done. In fact, she consistently papered over the crimes of the Commonwealth through moves such as Operation Legacy, while she bathed in luxury afforded in large part by international theft. And one of the main things that I've been hearing coming from monarchists as well as majority white people have been that even though the British Empire is responsible for most, if not all, of these terrible things, this is a very insensitive and inappropriate time to bring this up. But I would argue that point. This is actually the perfect time to bring it up. People of color have been speaking about these cruel systems for decades, if not centuries, and only now they're being heard because unfortunately the death of Queen Elizabeth II allowed a platform where white people are now exposed to these sentiments being shared. And statements like, well, unfortunately, you have to be respectful of the dead, in themselves ignore the pains of the people of color that have been crying out for generations for their people to be acknowledged and honored. As to why people of color are responding this way, I feel like I won't be able to word them properly due to my bias towards the monarchy, and that's a parasocial relationship that I'm very embarrassed to admit. So I'm going to use the help of my fellow TikTokers and let them share why these insensitive responses from the public are actually justified, and then we'll get into my final closing thoughts.
So I guess this is the talking point, huh? It's actually wrong to call the Queen a colonizer because she never colonized anyone, and actually she decolonized more than anyone else in history. This often paired with the claim that the monarchy in Britain hasn't had any real power in the last 100, 200, 500 years, so you can't hold them responsible for any bad thing that the British government has ever done. So first of all, which is it? Does she get credit for the British Empire falling apart and not being able to hold its colonies anymore? Or is she completely absolved from every fucking awful thing that the British government has done in the last 70 years? You can't have it both ways. Pick one. And, incidentally, she didn't decolonize anyone. The people who were asking for independence finally had it granted to them because, as mentioned, the British Empire fell apart and could no longer retain its colonies. Those are entirely different things. People throw around this claim that she never colonized anyone, and all it's telling the class is that these people don't understand a single goddamn thing about colonization or how it works. Invasion is a structure, not an event. Queen Elizabeth was coronated in 1953. Go ahead and Google for me real quick when the last Aboriginal children were stolen from their parents in this country, when the last residential boarding schools in Canada were closed. Governments across the Commonwealth were actively committing genocide against Indigenous populations in Her Majesty's name, deriving their authority and their right to govern from her. She does not get absolution from that because she wasn't the one technically giving the order. If I've learned anything about monarchists in the last few days, it's that they are desperate to have their cake and eat it too, to retain the institution of monarchy while actively disavowing any of the consequences of that decision. If you want your government's right to rule to be given to them by the king or the queen, you don't get to turn around and then say, but the king or the queen is actually absolved of any guilt or wrongdoing, because technically they don't have any power.
Some people are saying that celebrating or minimizing the death of the queen is insensitive. That may be true, but in my view, it's even more insensitive to saturate our media with celebratory posts about a person who, for many people, is a symbol of genocide, colonization, and all the violent institutions that came with it. She was queen when Britain helped lead the war that destroyed my country, and just this year she gave a knighthood to one of the main criminal masterminds behind it, Tony Blair. Far from showing respect for the dead, that's basically saying it's honorable to kill hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. And of course, this is just one of countless atrocities committed in the name of a crown adorned with the spoils of war. So in my view, it's totally inappropriate for people to police how victims of colonization talk about the passing of the Queen.
In 1902, England colonized what is now known as Kenya in East Africa. The goal was to turn Kenya into an agricultural colony and to use the proceeds of the sale of food to fund other projects in East Africa. England turned the native African people into what could be called indentured servants. And when they began to complain, England shipped in people from other colonies, specifically India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, throwing off the balance of power that the tribes people and the native Africans once had. This created an internal refugee crisis where millions of Africans that were native to the country did not have jobs or opportunities, or even land. Instead of giving people jobs and opportunities, England created a caste system within the country of squatters, contractual workers, and casual workers. Most of the people within the native Kikuyu and Luo tribes were considered squatters, and if they were caught farming on anyone else's land besides their own, they were sentenced to 270 days of free labor, basically forcing them to work for the same government that opposed them for free. After decades of mistreatment, the Kikuyu tribe decided to revolt. England responded by stripping them of further rights and even making it so they couldn't travel within their own country. The Kikuyu tribe responded with an armed resistance. This is the beginning of the Mau Mau revolt against the British colonizing government. The British government decided the best course of action was to start mass arresting thousands of Kikuyu people. The British government threw thousands of them into concentration and internment camps. And that's if they were lucky. The British policy was to unalive them on sight, including men, women, and children. And women were subject to gang violence of a certain nature. Estimated that 11,000 Kikuyu people, men, women, and children, were unalived on the spot when British people raided villages. And it's estimated that 150,000 Kikuyu people were unalived in internment camps. The majority of these atrocities happened within the lifetime of Queen Elizabeth, and while she was not directly responsible for the policy, her official title gave her complete knowledge to what was going on. Until this day, the Kikuyu people of Kenya have never received any apology for what's happened.
Those are the few TikToks that I wanted to share with you of people speaking out on this matter, and those barely even scratched the surface. Plenty more unfortunate events that have happened under Queen Elizabeth's rule. Ones that I can list at the top of my head right now would have to be the Malayan emergency, the Yemen saga, apartheid, and that happened in my very own country. Anyway, I will leave multiple sources down below that you can go through to educate yourself on this matter. Let's get into my final closing thoughts. Colonialism is a terrible institution that unfortunately still thrives in today's society as well. It's very unfair to expect people who still suffer from this system and many other injustices to be sympathetic towards figureheads who represented and contributed to these systems in one manner or another. The power of the British monarch has been built off the sore back of our ancestors. And the only people that benefited from this were white people. And it shows in how the privilege allows them to invalidate people of color's experiences and expecting them to praise the late and succeeding monarch. We can't keep romanticizing monarchy when it kind of has been the source for the inhumane treatment of people of color for years. I personally can mourn her passing, but I refuse to ignore the pain that this system has caused for hundreds of years. And neither should you. Anyway, I just want to say that I'm very interested to see how the monarch will continue to survive in these coming years. They do have to make a lot of changes still in order to fit with the modern times. And I'm very interested to see what those changes will be under the rule of King Charles III. And I just want to say, rest in peace, Queen Elizabeth II. Your rule has been great, but it has also caused a lot of pain. And unfortunately, we have to celebrate your legacy while remembering the good and the bad. With that said, I would like to end the video right here. I usually say, I hope you enjoyed the video, but I do realize that there's not much to enjoy here. So I do hope that you learned a few things from this video. And that's it. And remember, if thou shalt not slayeth, thou shalt not stayeth. And that's on period. Bye.